The digital divide is really the next level of infrastructure that we have to address. There was a time when not every home had electricity, not every home had a telephone or access to a telephone or even had water connected to it. And in this day and age and in the coming century, the years of this century, the ability to communicate is going to be what people demand and use. And so it's literally at that level of infrastructure. There's a real lack of understanding when we talk about digital communications and whether it's cable or DSL or any of these, that it's mostly built around entertainment. But more and more our businesses are relying on it, absolutely. Education systems are relying on it. If someone wants to get educated, educate their kids. If someone wants to conduct a business at home, wants to communicate around the globe, which we have a global economy centered in California, you can't do it without the appropriate pipe, if you will, to move that data. We've built roads so that people can get to where they live. We need to move data to them as we do all of the other utilities. The problem with the understanding around the digital divide, there's political, economic, as well as a real lack of understanding of the technology and what's ultimately at stake. A lot of times as we've tried to work on bills and programs to close the divide in the legislature, a lot of it falls down to, oh, it's just for people's entertainment. But it is so much more than that, and it will be more than that. If we're really going to do telehealth in California, if digital access is going to be a significant part of our educational system, as it is in many areas. Many people who work, and it's a part of our economy, need access. Businesses do, but also individuals do as they're trying to pursue whatever it is that they do for a living. Having adequate access to communication infrastructure is really very important. And since communication infrastructure is moving towards digital access, it's that large pipe to be able to move the kinds of data that people are expecting. And so the economics around it are difficult because it's an infrastructure investment. We do roads, we know how to do roads, but we're not necessarily thinking about the same thing when we're trying to move data and move around the state people's ability to do the work, get the education ultimately that they need, and yes, get the entertainment that they need, because that's very much a part of our modern life. So it's an infrastructure question that has primarily been left to the large companies that are providing the data throughout and that data infrastructure throughout California. They, of course, are making economic decisions about where they can make money, which is fine. So the last bit, the underserved communities, the rural communities, government needs to play a very significant role, as we do for water, as we do for electricity, as we do for roads or any other infrastructure, that we close that gap and ensure that all Californians have equal access. The understanding issue also is part and parcel to all of the previous, because I think not everybody understands what it means and what the technologies are. We get caught up in cell phones and wireless when because of rate structures and because of other terrestrial limitations on a wireless signal, it may not be a complete replacement for the communications that are necessary, from being able to run fiber into areas and then build the infrastructure out from there. So we need to be able to look ahead and build infrastructure that is not necessarily technology specific so that it can grow as the technology grows, but that we are ensuring that inside everyone's home, they have the communications capability that their neighbors do and everyone in California does. The California Emerging Technology Fund has been a real leader in identifying and looking to those areas where we need to close that infrastructure gap. They have been working with the broadband consortia, which are around the state, and providing some really needed resources and leadership in upping all of our knowledge about what's at stake and how we do this. So CETF has continued to provide that significant role. They also, because of their political savvy, know how to work the building and have been recognized as an organization that can explain things to legislators who need to better understand the impacts in their district. They've done, I think, a decent job of providing that information to legislators so legislators understand what's at stake and who's being left behind. We still obviously have a lot more work to do, working with our partners and working with the major telecommunications providers who are already there, helping them and providing appropriate motivations to get the system put together. The legislature needs to get educated on how the technology works and what is being provided and isn't being provided around the state. I think legislators would be surprised to know in their district who's on which side of the divide, who has and who doesn't have. I think rural legislators or legislators who have large rural areas are beginning to understand it because it's their folks who are their constituents who are saying, hey, I don't have the access that I need. I've got a great example in my district. There's a school that's giving every kid a Chromebook, basically, a physical way to do their homework and do their research and to collaborate in the way that modern education system wants kids to collaborate. But literally half of those kids need to come in on a Friday or a Saturday, come sit outside of a classroom where they can pick up a Wi-Fi signal because they don't have adequate bandwidth out where they live, or they have artificial data constraints that they run out if they have parents who are using it for work or for entertainment, they're using it for school, they'll run out sometimes 2-3 weeks into the month, and then they're stuck trying to find a Wi-Fi hotspot someplace around, including going all the way down to the school. So there's not equality there in an institution that's trying to provide equal access to education for all of their students. I think legislators need to understand who's being served, who's not being served, and they need to understand the significance of being able to have ready data at ways that we individuals expect to have that data. If you look at the advertisements for broadband, and it's couched in television access and cable access, and the companies who are providing it want their consumers to be buying more and more amounts of data, and they're trying to convince them they need to buy more and more amounts of data. At the same time, they're saying, oh, but nobody really, when we're trying to fund it or trying to get their assistance to do outreach into the rural areas and in the underserved communities, their answers in the legislature are, well, people don't really need that level of bandwidth. I mean, when we're talking about 25 megabits down and 3 to 5 megabits up, that's really inadequate for the kind of interaction that most people are expecting and need and use on a regular basis. And when you're talking about 25 megabits as a standard, depending on interference in the atmosphere, depending on interference down the line, or how many people are actually using a signal, that performance degrades significantly. So it's a theoretical maximum, but not a practical recognition of how much data is actually being able to move through that pipe. So there's a real misunderstanding or a lack of understanding in the legislature about who's being impacted, who's not being impacted, what the needs are. And if we're going to truly make California, give everyone in California appropriate access, whether it's to health care, whether it's to the job market, to education, and all, that digital infrastructure is a critical component. The legislature needs to get educated on the fact that this is an infrastructure question. The digital divide and the lack of access is really an infrastructure question that we need to be paying attention to. But also, I think legislators would be surprised to look home and look in their own districts and see who's on which side of that divide. It's primarily underserved communities and rural communities. I think rural legislators or legislators who have large areas of rural constituents are beginning to hear more and more from them that they are feeling left out of the progress that is California. And they're beginning to understand that they're not on the progressive part of that divide. We've built out a lot of the urban areas and the areas that have the demand and have the customers for the companies who are building those. And a lot of companies are trying to get out into more rural areas and provide large backbones, if you will, fiber backbones across the state that are the main ways that we carry that data between regions and between communities. But a lot of communities are still not able to access what their neighbors are seeing or their neighboring communities are seeing because of a lack of consistency in how we've built that infrastructure out. That's the role of government. Just as we've done roads, just as we engage in water, we are supposed to be helping to fill out that level of infrastructure, digital infrastructure, so that all Californians have equal access. So legislators need to reach out to their communities and I think change the mindset as to what it means to have a modern communication system and what our role as a state in ensuring that that infrastructure is as homogeneous as possible.